Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Russia-Central Asia relations. My name is Kristina Silvan. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I know that people are still joining us from the waiting room, but given that we have a limited time, I would suggest that we slowly start the webinar, get the webinar started. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome everyone here today, and even a greater pleasure to have four wonderful speakers, all experts of Russia-Central Asia relations. And I think we're going to have a fantastic discussion. As a part of my work at FIA, I work on Central Asian politics, as well as Russia's foreign policy. And so, yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this webinar today is because it's a topic I've been following closely myself for the last couple of years. But it's also a topic I think that has become more topical in the last year, not only because of Russia's aggression into Ukraine, but also the events of January 22 in Kazakhstan, where, as we know, Russia-led CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, deposed a so-called peacekeeping mission. And at the time, there was a lot of talk in the expert community about, Russia sort of regaining its status in Central Asia, remaining a sort of regional hegemon. But now with the war, it seems like the tone has changed again, and the talk about Russia's decline has really become the mainstream argument. Now, indeed, since February last year, we've observed how the governments in Central Asia have had sort of mixed responses to the war. Some of them have sort of sought to position themselves as neutral, not in a way not supporting Russia, but also not condemning the aggression. And also the relations with Ukraine have been different, of course, depending on the country. And Russia, in turn, seems to continue to see Central Asia as its sphere of influence and displays Central Asian states as solid allies. I think only Belarus can match the narrative there. But at the same time, there has been cracks to the narrative. Some commentators questioning the regional states' commitment to supporting Russia in its confrontation with the West. So all in all, I believe we really have a lot to discuss, especially since the situation is changing as the war in Ukraine drags on. So it is my absolute pleasure, as I said, to welcome these wonderful speakers and to moderate today's discussion. And in the beginning, I'd like to introduce today's roundtable members, who are joining us from all around the world, really. So if we start sort of west to east from the UK, we have Kate Mallinson, who's the director of PRISM Political Risk Management and an associate fellow of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. Ms. Mallinson is an acknowledged independent political risk expert on Central Asia, and she has worked continuously in the region for decades already. Unfortunately, Ms. Mallinson will have to leave us a little bit before the end of the webinar, but she'll be here for most of the discussion. Also from the UK, we have Ayjan Sharshenova, who's a political analyst, usually based in Bishkek, but right now also in London, as she is working as a research fellow at the Foreign Policy Center. Dr. Sharshenova's research focuses on public diplomacy, international development, and the EU's and Russia's policies towards Central Asia, especially Russian soft power in Central Asia. Now, shifting eastwards, welcoming you in Helsinki, we have Mirzahid Kharshiev, who's a PhD researcher at the University of Helsinki. His research interests include governance, state-society relations, and development patterns in Central Asia. And last but not least, joining all the way from Kazakhstan, we have Dosim Satbayev, who is the director of Kazakhstan Risks Assessment Group and a board member of the Kazakhstan Council on International Relations. Dr. Satbayev is a political scientist, publicist, and publisher who has worked on Central Asian politics for decades. So, I'll soon give the floor to our speakers, who will each give a short introduction to some aspect of Russia-Central Asia relations, as I've sort of asked them to. And after that, I'll present a few questions to kick off the roundtable, and then we will have plenty of time for questions from the audience. As you might have noticed, the microphones of the participants cannot be unmuted. So if you have a question, just write it to the chat and I will pose it to our speakers. So without further ado, let me yield the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Dosim Satbayev.
Well, okay. Again, hi, everybody. Dear Christine, thank you very much for invitation. Yes, it's very important topic, not only for Central Asia countries, but for European Union too, for example. 2 weeks ago, I was in Germany, for example, and I had meeting with some diplomat from Foreign Ministry of Germany, and I know that a lot of attention now from European Union towards to the Central Asia countries. Well, it's connected with China, with Russia, with the problem of secondary sanction. Well, a lot of problems. Well, but my topic will be devoted to the problem of security in Central Asia region. And when we talk about the security, I believe that our region has some important challenges after the start of the war in Ukraine. First challenge, building a new model of relation with Russia. Second, very important task for our region, building a new geopolitical balance towards to Russia. Well, the third task, very important, reducing the risk of secondary sanction. And I believe my colleague Kate will talk about it too. Well, the fourth task, to not be drawn into any military conflict, including within the region. Because yes, we can talk about the war between Ukraine and Russia, well, but we should know that in our region we have some conflict zone between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Well, and that's why we should to destabilize situation in our region, because it's very important for us. Well, the fifth task, the region, Central Asia region, should be too important to be threatened and too important to be lost for all major geopolitical players. When I talk about the major geopolitical players, I mean Russia, China, Turkey, I mean United States, European Union, some influential Arab countries. Well, and sixth task, we should make lemonade from lemon, because we should to use the windows of opportunities that appear now after the war in Ukraine. Yes, well, if we talk about, for example, about the relationship between Central Asia and Russia, yes, on the one side, the war in Ukraine has destroyed the illusion about the military power of the Russian army and weapons. Well, and this is a rather serious blow to Russia's reputation as a military partner, including the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Yes, we know that now Russia is a very toxic partner for everybody. But we should be very realistic, because from another hand, the countries of Central Asia region are not ready to end the relationship with Russia. Why? Because Russia now still has some own leverage of economic and political pressure on the countries of Central Asia. Well, for example, if we talk, well, my colleague from Uzbekistan maybe will continue this topic, but if we talk about the Kazakhstan, yes, I know that maybe the most part of experts know about the problem with Caspian pipeline consortium. Yes, I believe that a lot of know about the about 80%, 80% of our oil passes through the Russia territory to European market. But I'd like to emphasize that we have another problems if we talk about with Russia. For example, some regions of Kazakhstan depend on Russian electricity supplies. Yes, I mean north and western part of Kazakhstan. Well, we have some problems with water in the western part of Kazakhstan, because you know that Ural River, for example, this is a river comes from Russia, and now we have very big problem with deficit of water in western part of Kazakhstan. Well, you know that last time, for example, in this region of Kazakhstan, every time appeared a lot of social tension. You know about the Janaozen, yes. You know about a lot of meetings and the social demonstration in this region, and I believe in future this will be very big problems if we talk about the relationship between Kazakhstan and Russia. I mean water problem, not only Russia, because we have the same problem with China too. Well, another problem, deficit of gas in Kazakhstan and in Uzbekistan, because now in Kazakhstan we can see very big discussion around the negotiation between Kazakhstan and Gazprom, because Russia is trying to build some new pipeline Kazakhstan towards China. Yes, and that's why in Kazakhstan a lot of protest against of this project. Well, but our government, they said, well, in next 10 years in Kazakhstan we'll have very big deficit of gas. That's why we should to receive gas from Russia, not only from Russia, but from Turkmenistan too. Well, that's why, yes, now we have a lot of sensitive zone if we talk about the relationship between Kazakhstan and Russia. Well, if we talk about the building of new geopolitical balance, yes, of course, first geopolitical balance for Central Asia countries and for Kazakhstan, of course, too. I believe this organization of Turkic state. Well, because I believe that Turkey, for example, it's a very important partner for Kazakhstan. If we talk about the transport logistic cooperation, if we talk about the military cooperation, yes, well, another geopolitical balance, China. But yes, we should to be very careful if we talk about very close cooperation with China, because China is like I said, Russia, it's empire mentality state. Yes, China dragon. Yes, we should to have some distance towards to China dragon. But from another hand, I'd like to say that if we talk about the stability in Central Asia region, I believe that any kind of destabilization for China is not very profitable scenario. For China, it's very important to save stability in our region, because you know that another strategic a sphere of strategic interest of China, it's not only Central Asia region. Taiwan, for example, it's priority. That's why Central Asia region, yes, it's a very important partner for China if we talk about the security. Well, it's very important for Kazakhstan, because I believe after the start of war in Ukraine, maybe decrease risks of realize some Ukrainian scenario in Kazakhstan. Yes, because I believe that any kind of any attempt of Russia to realize this is scenario in northern and western part of Kazakhstan, I believe it will be very negative reaction from China. Not only from China, but from Turkey too. But China and Turkey now, it's very close partner for Russia. That's why it's a very interesting situation now, yes. Well, that for example, before February last year, yes, in Kazakhstan, we talk a lot about these threats. I mean, threats of Ukrainian scenario in Kazakhstan. But now I believe this is risk decrease. But in any case, we should to understand that if we talk about the security of our region, we should to pay a lot of attention to the Russia and China cooperation. because last visit of Xi Jinping in Moscow, it was very interesting visit, because I believe that Russia will try to use China will try to use Russia as, like I said, geopolitical instrument in confrontation with European countries and United States in European if you talk about the Ukrainian conflict. Yes, and for example, now we should to imagine what will happen in our region if maybe nearest time will be some conflict between China and Taiwan. It means that China will be another very close neighbor of our region that will be in confrontation with Western countries, Russia and China. And what will happen with our countries? I believe it will be very big problems for our multi-vector foreign policy, not only for Kazakhstan, but for another Central Asia countries. Okay, thank you. It's very short remarks about the security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dosim, for this nice beginning to our conversation. I already have a lot of questions coming to my mind. I especially liked your point about actually the Ukrainian scenario for Kazakhstan perhaps becoming less likely, because that's something that certainly there's been a lot of talk about, ethnic Russians or Russian speakers living in Kazakhstan's border zone, whether Kazakhstan could be next. So I really I put a note on that one. Thank you. So now moving on to our next speaker, Kate Mallinson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And also thank you to Dosim. I'm going to be talking a bit about sort of commercial and trade relations between Central Asia and Russia. And as Dosim mentioned, the kind of vulnerability of the region's kind of security makes it sort of more prone to sort of Russia's more neo-imperialist sort of commercial objectives in these countries. And more than ever, Russia sort of wants to increase its sort of stranglehold of what it sees as within its sphere of influence and the near abroad. And as Dosim mentioned, the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year was seen as a kind of an inflection point for Central Asia and its relations with Russia. And Dosim talked about sort of building new regional security structures and architecture and geopolitical relationships. And the regional governments made a series of anti-Russian pronouncements and gestures in response to the war, while large swathes of the Central Asian populations, particularly the younger generations, voiced and actually showed their support with humanitarian aid for Ukraine, and still do. And it was quite something to see. But we only need to look at the kind of trade and commercial ties between Central Asia and Russia, as we're going to do, to kind of understand how closely tied Central Asia still is to Russia, and to remind ourselves of Russia's continuing enormous leverage over the Central Asian region. And there's a few sort of, I'm going to just mention a few reasons for this kind of persistent sort of commercial ties between Central Asia and Russia. And, obviously the region is a prisoner of geography, and geography dictates that the remote Central Asian countries, with Kazakhstan having the longest continuous border, famously, in the world with Russia, have very interlinked and interdependent trade and commercial relationships with their northern neighbor. And historically, trade routes for the region's economies were designed to facilitate trade and traffic flows towards the western side of Russia. And you can't change that overnight, however much you would want to. And in terms of security, as Dosim talked about, Russia has traditionally played the role of a regional security guarantor. And as he said, the war has destroyed the illusion of Russia as being a military power, to come to their support, and has forced them to look for other additional sort of security partners, such as China or Turkey. But Russia still has a lot of security cards, both formally and informally, that it continues to play in Central Asia, ranging from the 2 million Uzbek labor migrants in Russia to the CSTO's role in shoring up support for President Tokayev during Kantar in Kazakhstan in January 2022. and to Tajikistan's ongoing sort of unrest in Gorno-Badakhshan. And at the moment, as globally, the Central Asian countries are sort of nervous because of the socio-economic challenges they face of domestic unrest, and this really rattles the government. And Russia is there, and it has the surplus energy, that the gas that some of these countries mentioned. That Dosim mentioned, and it has a near monopoly. Russia has a near monopoly on hydrogen export routes to the West. Therefore, it maintains its role as a decisive security actor in the region. And finally, I just say sort of informality and corruption. The informal sort of hidden constitutions in Central Asia play a key role in the country's relationships with Russia. The ties between key decision makers and business operators in Central Asia and Russia are still very strong. You've got that generation that were educated, the elite that were educated in Moscow. It's what this kind of deal making still takes place, but it's out of view. So we have you have to work hard to really understand how deep these kind of commercial relationships are and where the money flows are going. And in terms of there's been elevated trade from Central Asia towards Russia since the war started. The borders in Central Asia are infamously porous, and data disclosure is poor. And even if the senior kind of regional governments are doing their utmost with limited capacity to adhere to Western sanctions, there are bad actors who are financially benefiting from trade circumvention and sanctions violation. I'm now going to move on just to look at areas where we see this intensifying cooperation between Russia and Central Asia. It's mainly, we see it in energy, in oil and gas and uranium. And with markets drying up in Europe for Russia's oil and gas, Russia is naturally trying to redirect its export potential towards Central Asia. And Russia has this enormous gas surplus, which is a good fit for Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, which, although they're very resource-rich countries, they have insufficient gas output owing to their export obligations and fast-growing domestic consumption. We saw protests last year in Uzbekistan over gas shortages. Last year, Russia came up with the idea of a tripartite gas union, and the Central Asian government sort of recoiled in horror at the idea of another union with Russia. But with few other options and looming social challenges, Uzbekistan has signed a roadmap agreement with Gazprom to increase imports of Russian natural gas. And Kazakhstan is also likely to accept Russian gas, especially considering it will be sold at a markdown. But in the longer term, these deals give Russia increased authority and leverage over the region, just as we sort of think it should be moving away. And in January, Lukoil, it's already an existing investor in Kazakhstan. It became the first foreign investor to agree to new operating terms and for oil fields in the Caspian Sea. And it's also planning to enter the retail fuel market in Kazakhstan. Lukoil has so far avoided direct sanctions, but the prospects for this company, which is the second largest oil company in Russia, are increasingly under threat as sanctions against Russian crude oil products swing into effect. And suspicion of links to Moscow grows. And I think this is a bit of a theme of my presentation, is that the kind of noose is getting tighter for some of these Russian companies which are trying to increase their leverage over Central Asia, and it's putting the region in a really difficult predicament, and the West. And we know in Uzbekistan there's been recent investigations that show how close Gazprom is to the Uzbek elite and controlling key oil and gas fields. But we can also see Russian oligarchs also looking for cheap assets in the region. There's been a sort of airport purchase recently, and I think the pressure, we can't overestimate the pressure on countries such as Kazakhstan from Russia, in terms of sort of decoupling from the dollar and just moving away from the West. And they are fighting tooth and nail, some of the individuals, to try and resist this pressure. And there's sort of weekly talks between the prime ministers, and it's just going to be very interesting the direction it goes. And I think uranium is also another sector in where we have to watch closely what's happening with increased Russian involvement In December, Russian state nuclear company Rosatom purchased a stake in a joint venture which owns the licenses for a field in southern Kazakhstan, which is potentially the world's largest in situ recovery uranium mine. And this has largely gone unreported. And as it goes exactly against what the Kazakh government have said they will do, repeatedly, that they won't sell their strategic crown jewels, such as kind of uranium, and they'll keep it for the country. And particularly, why are they selling it to their pariah northern neighbor during a kind of really sensitive time? So it's in these deals where you kind of see how fragile the relationship is, or how vulnerable. Russia has also, Rosatom has also restated its commitment to build a nuclear power plant in Uzbekistan. And this is again against a growing risk that the West could sanction Rosatom as EU members push for sanctions on Russia's civil nuclear energy sector, and G7 leaders look to cut Russia off from global nuclear supply chains. Just moving on to trade quickly, I mean, there's been kind of evidence of a substantial change in regional trade patterns precipitated by the war on Ukraine and the introduction of trade sanctions on Russia. After March 2022, there was a dramatic drop in direct exports from the EU to Russia, accompanied by a substantial uptick in exports to countries in the Eurasian Economic Union. As you're aware, it's a customs-free trade bloc, so therefore the checks are very minimal, similar to the EU. And there is evidence of trade via neighbouring economies being used to circumvent the sanctions. And the recent European Bank of Reconstruction and Development papers argued that these trade flows comprise goods at least partially subject to sanctions or similar to sanctioned ones. And anecdotal research that we've done suggests the same. And last week, we keep on seeing American and EU kind of sanctions representative officials flying over to Central Asia from the US Treasury and other places to talk to the countries about what they see as perceived sanctions violations. And it's kind of this broader offensive to try and pressure Central Asian countries to sort of do that as much as they can not to undermine Western sanctions on Russia's economy and to terminate its access to kind of dual use technology, which could be abetting the military invasion in Ukraine. But it's incredibly hard for the Central Asian governments to monitor and keep control. And it's very unlikely that they are actively providing covert assistance to Russian government attempts to evade sanctions. It's more likely kind of the combination of custom bodies, sort of lack of capacity to monitor goods, bad actors, and grey trade schemes. But ultimately, just to conclude, with Central Asia being exposed to Russia's increasingly kind of politically toxic kind of corporate behemoth, and with these unmanageable potential sanctions violations, kind of against a background of rising Western momentum to tighten and enforce sanctions, the region is finding itself in a very complex situation. And the challenge for the West is to try and disincentivize the regional governments or the region from kind of re-exporting potentially critical goods to Russia without alienating the Central Asian governments, as they really want to keep them on side. And I would also add that the onus also falls on Western exporters to have greater visibility on their end users. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. I think that's one of the questions that we've been asking since the beginning of the war, is whether Central Asian states are helping Russia to evade the sanctions, or whether that's happening sort of by accident. Now also sort of following your theme on corruption and these sort of Soviet era ties, let me yield the floor to Mirzahid, who will hopefully say something about elite relations.
Thank you very much, Christina. As the most inexperienced person among the speakers, probably I will start with some caveats, because elite may mean many different things, many different years. So here I'm probably referring to senior level bureaucrats, whom, in Soviet times, they used to call nomenklatura, and why I'm doing that, because I think it's a single most important social group, which is still kind of has the most or the ultimate power over decision making in socio-political matters, especially when it comes to foreign policy. So, and another caveat related to that is this, as one civil senior official said during one of my interviews in Central Asia, said like everything related to him, like meaning the president, is top state secret. So meaning what I have to say about the elite is mostly kind of educated guesses. So there is very difficult to say something with certainty about what is happening inside the cabinet's top level. So obviously there are lots of things that can be said, but I would like to kind of draw your attention to probably three aspects which have been like, in a way, has already been kind of like dealt with by Kate and Dosim. So first point I would like to make is about this kind of, how to say, the authoritarian nature of the countries and the way like we have a very close relationship in political power and big money in Central Asia. That's no secret. So some people call it plutocracy, some people call it state capture, but however we label them, like it seems that the kind of senior like state position is the easiest and the most common way to earn big money, and so it can be either like you become a kind of senior politician or senior person in the government, or like one of your kind of partners or your family members will become one, and over time, so this accumulated capital like has a tendency to look for new markets, and what we have seen, as Kate was mentioning, and people are looking for like new kind of partnership, and the easiest way was like the markets that you speak the language of, that you are familiar in the culture, etc. So so there have been lots of cases of, for example, Kazakh or Uzbek or like Russian oligarchs like making partnerships with kind of politically exposed people in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and elsewhere in Central Asia. So there have been numerous reports, like probably as you have been following, by many different investigators, journalists, researchers, about the nature of these kind of relations. And so another thing, traditionally, these kind of partnerships have been seen as a kind of asset, given the situation in Central Asia. But with the war, like some of them at least have been are becoming a liability, as you might know. But however, so like in Central Asia, relations comes like they are built over a very long time, and even if the new sanctions regimes are kind of testing these kind of relationships and partnerships, we don't see the kind of partnerships crumbling. But at the same time, we understand the government's wish to kind of at least sideline or take a distance from these kind of partnerships for the time being. The second aspect is about values. So as Luca Ankeshi recently has talked about, authoritarian regeneration in Central Asia, and the way it might be kind of helpful, for Russia to gain or to kind of maintain its relations. Partly he's right in the sense that Central Asian governments are the way civil servants are recruited, civil servants are socialized in this organization, etc. in terms of values, when they're coming to the top, when they're becoming the nomenclatura or this kind of senior bureaucracy, most of them kind of share similar values of illiberalism, or kind of how to say, like society should be controlled kind of thinking in general. So and even if like in the first generation of leaders in Central Asia, like they were like from this kind of communist kind of schools, etc. But even if you look to the new generation of leaders or like senior bureaucrats, you can see that lots of them are like Western educated, like especially those who are around the table. But there is no set, like there is not much optimism in terms of if they are going to kind of introduce some kind of liberal reforms. And the third aspect is about China. So Central Asian kind of governments or the leaders are bad at kind of reflecting, or like are bad at kind of reflecting on their own errors, etc., especially in terms of economy or domestic politics. But they are very good in terms of foreign policy, and what they have learned a lot. And what they are very experienced is the kind of act of balancing, and they've been quite good at it. And the war in Ukraine has provided a very good, like kind of good opportunity to utilize these kind of skills that they have kind of accumulated over time. Yeah. So China has been like on the background for for a long time, but it has started to come to the forefront, or it has started to become a kind of how to say a main power, especially like in the 1990s, sorry, 2020s. For example, the way, for example, there were reports about how Japar's campaign was funded by some people linked to China, or like how, for example, Dustin was referring to the way Chinese, how to say, how like how Chinese respect for, or call for respect for territorial integrity of Central Asian countries might be kind of easing this kind of pressure off from like Central Asian countries in terms of being the kind of the target of aggression later on. And Uzbekistan has recently appointed a foreign minister whose kind of main experience in terms of foreign policy is related to China. So probably I will stop here, and then maybe we could continue on other issues or the questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mirza. That was fascinating. And your point about younger generations possibly being educated in the West always reminds me of Turkmenistan's current president, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, who famously went to study abroad. And when he became president, he sort of started with even more repressive authoritarian measures. Anyway, returning to this idea about younger generations, I hope we can perhaps hear something about it from our final speaker, Aycan Sharshanova. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Christina. How much time do I have?
5 to 10 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes. Okay, I'll start my timer. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the speakers as well. I think this is a very fascinating topic, and I would like to look at it from the point of view of foreign policy, relations between Russia and Central Asia. Now, the first 20 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had a bit of a past dependence, and Central Asia has been treated as near abroad, somewhere in between foreign policy and domestic politics, not quite a foreign country or foreign region, but also not quite a part of Russia anymore. I think that past dependency continued for quite a while, but we can see the watershed moment last year when the war in Ukraine started and Russia has expected certain reactions or proof of allegiance from the Central Asian leaders. And Central Asian leaders in return have insisted on either strategic silence, as Professor Dadabayev put it, or on multi-vector policy, or on very skillful maneuvering between the West and Russia. Now, we're also partners at bilateral and multilateral levels. Bilateral level, we had established our relations with Russia back in 1992, pretty much when Russia has been establishing formal relations with everybody else around the world. In terms of multilateral relations, Russia and Central Asia are parts and different combinations of the Commonwealth of Independent States, of the Eurasian Economic Union, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, so on and so forth. Now, again, when it comes to collective security, I think the war in Ukraine has proved that Russia does not regard its partners within the collective security networks as equal partners, because obviously the heads of states of Central Asian countries have not been informed or consulted about the start of the war. A situation is quite unimaginable in a functioning collective security arrangement, because as you can imagine, if we have a collective security framework and one of the members of the collective security framework is starting a massive military operation abroad, outside of the framework, the partners should ideally be informed and consulted, because obviously that has a backlash on them as well. In terms of foreign policy of Russia, there are some slight changes as well. For example, in 2016 foreign policy concept, Central Asia is not mentioned. It's only mentioned in the context of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In the more recent foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, which was issued about a month ago, Central Asia is finally mentioned as a regional priority on its own, without any linkages to other organizations or other actors. The sort of informal actor on the Russian side used to be Dmitry Kozak, deputy head of President's administration. Whenever anything happens, anything significant was happening in Central Asia, it would usually be Dmitry Kozak who would travel to Central Asian republics and hold behind the closed doors negotiations, or possibly communicate President Putin's will to the presidents of Central Asia. However, his role seems to have diminished after the start of the war. Again, this is a shift. So in a way, the actor who has been very active in the region, or was the link between the region and President Putin, has started disappearing from the screens of the Russian TV, but also generally from the information field. There is a feeling that Putin's narrow circle of trusted officials is now changed as well. So if before it was more diverse and included foreign policy professionals and bureaucrats like Dmitry Kozak, as well as security professionals, now it seems that it's mostly security law enforcement professionals in the narrow circle of Putin, obviously dictated by the conditions of the war. Nevertheless, the relations between the countries continue. And as my colleagues have mentioned, there are concerns about secondary sanctions, there are concerns about the fate of our labor migrants, the labor migrant community in Russia. But there are also concerns about finding a path that works for the Central Asian governments and Central Asian people. And I think this is the key in any discussion about Central Asian Russian politics. Russia is there. Russia has always been a strategic partner for the Central Asian countries. But I think the war in Ukraine has been a massive watershed moment when the governments and the publics, actually, of Central Asian republics have come to realize that we need to develop our own path. We need to put our priorities and our national interests first. And I think Russia's understanding that too, because if before the war there was a very utilitarian and pragmatic approach to the region, a very top-down approach to Central Asian partners, as well as demonstrated in the multilateral relations within this collective security framework, there was very limited funding for an active, engaged policy with the Central Asian region. It was usually more taken for granted. Nowadays, there seems to be a shift. There's a watershed moment for the Russian foreign policy, where Russian foreign policy is departing from the old Soviet patterns. It's understanding probably a bit more that Central Asia has got a very pragmatic approach as well to its bilateral and multilateral relations with Russia, as well as with any other partners abroad. I think there is also departure from the shared Soviet past. It's been 30 years since the Soviet Union has collapsed, and the countries have taken the path of their own, both culturally and politically and linguistically as well. There are issues related to the status of the Russian language too. I think there is an increased debate on transfer to Latin script or bigger use of the local languages, not necessarily at the expense of the Russian language, but I think this is how it's seen in Russia. There is also the issue of Russian ethnic groups in Central Asia, and I believe it was a watershed moment for them as well, for their self-identification. There was a debate or shift in thinking there too. Some people have felt more attached to the Russian community or the Russian world, while other people felt more inclined to be a part of the Central Asian nations, and they started identifying themselves more as citizens of the countries rather than ethnic Russians. So I think overall, the war in Ukraine has become a massive, I keep saying watershed moment, I just cannot come up with a different word, but it honestly is a huge shift in everything, in thinking, in culture, in approaches, in attitudes, both at the highest level, at the government level, but also at the lowest level, at the level of the public debates. And even the fact that in academia there are debates about decolonization, I said that word, you can tick off the bingo. I think that's a signifier as well that something is changing and something big is coming, and the shifts are going to be quite tectonic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aydan. Again, lots of food for thought. And now, I can see that there are already some questions coming in to the chat. That's great. But before we start addressing them, there's just a few really general points I want to ask of you. And I think the big first question that I have is about the labor migration that a few of you mentioned in your presentations or short introductions. And I want to kind of return to that point and ask you what is really what are the current trends of labor migration from Central Asia to Russia. As we know, there are millions of Central Asian labor migrants working in Russia, and they make a huge contribution to the Russian economy. Is that still so? Has something changed?
I could probably start. I believe, or at least from what I saw so far, the changes have not been that drastic. So the patterns are still the same, and Central Asian labor migrants still choose Russia as primary destination. However, there are some slight patterns. So obviously, this is not a regulated market. It's a proper free market. People choose to go to Russia because they find opportunities, but they choose so because the Russian ruble is still fairly strong compared to the Central Asian currencies. Nevertheless, there are signs that Central Asian labor migrants have started choosing other destinations as well. It's not just anecdotal evidence. There is hard data from the IOM, as well as from fellow researchers. If I'm not mistaken, Shahzod Aliyev and Rustam Udinboyev wrote a wonderful book about non-Russian migration as well. So the Turkish destination is quite popular. The Middle Eastern destination is quite popular. There is also state-regulated migration patterns, quite small at the moment, but I think it's a testing ground for South Korean government, for example, or for the British government to bring seasonal workers on short-term work visas from Central Asia and then send them back. I mean, that's the outcome of Brexit. But obviously, it depends on the situation, economic situation in Russia. If the Russian ruble continues to be stronger than Central Asian currencies, and if there are still, I mean, there is never a lack of jobs in Russia because Russia is an aging population, an older country with a lot of work to do. So I think Central Asian migrants are quite safe in this regard. But there are reports that Central Asian migrants are being targeted as recruitment for the private military companies, as well as by civilian contractors, and transported to the war zone. So obviously that's not particularly attractive. And I think once there is a negative backlash on that, probably the migration would reduce for security reasons. like personal security of the labor migrants.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think the economic contraction, although it was less than people thought it might be in Russia, sort of that constrained demand for labor, but simultaneously emigration from Russia last year and also mobilization into the army increased demand. But I agree that kind of the Central Asian countries are the citizens are wary of mobilization. So therefore, inflows of sort of more permanent status migrants from Central Asia really kind of diminished, whereas registration for sort of more temporary job seekers in Russia kind of substantially kind of increased. I think it was almost as much as 50% increase from Tajikistan and 25% from Uzbekistan.
Yeah, may I add something? In general, I see so the general trend is that let me start from a general observation. So most of the migration from Central Asia to Russia is circular. People go there, stay there for a year, 2 years, something like that, and come back, and then they and a new batch of people are sent. So this is the but in this migration loop, like a person may be like 5 to 10 years, something like that. So what I see in general is that those who have been going to Russia in this kind of circular movement, they are still going there. So the place is somehow familiar. They know people there, etc. So there are kind of established roots already. So and the economic situation, contrary to many expectations, have not worsened that much that makes going to Russia worthless in terms of well-being for the migrants. So but at the same time, as Central Asia is producing excess labor, and like every year we have only in Uzbekistan up to like 600, 7,100 new kind of youngsters, teenagers coming, starting to work, etc., or looking for work. Increasingly among them, more people are there is an increasing percentage of people looking for work outside of Russia or in other destinations. So this trend is happening. But the problem is that there are not many markets or labor markets which are openly accessible like Russia is, or like Europe or etc. But I've seen and apparently the biggest change has happened with this kind of citizenship applications, etc. There are lots of Central Asians who after staying in Russia for many years, they saw that obtaining a Russian citizenship is the best way forward for them, to lead their lives, etc. So this number has dropped significantly, I think. Maybe except Tajikistan, because Tajikistan is a different case, given the limited opportunities for work in Tajikistan itself, and also they have this kind of double kind of citizenship agreement with Russia, etc. More Central Asian migrants are not seeing Russia as a kind of permanent, easily accessible or favorable kind of place to go for work, but they are kind of finding it difficult, to choose from other options that they have. So that's what I can say.
Yeah,
well,
thank
I
you.
have very short comments, if you don't mind. Well, traditionally in Kazakhstan, we haven't a lot of labor migrants in Russia, but now we have a lot of new problems. I mean, labor migrants from Russia in Kazakhstan, because last year,
that would have been my next question.
yes. After the start of military mobilization, yes. Now in Kazakhstan, about 100,000 Russian citizens live. Yes, it's too big for very small population. If you talk about the Kazakhstan, yes. And now in Kazakhstan, a lot of discussion, what will happen? Yes, because we talk about the future of our labor market, we talk about the future of our self-identification, because we don't know what happened with these people if we talk about the mentality. Well, maybe these people supported Mr. Putin, but they are not going to war in Ukraine, and they try to find some work in Kazakhstan, but it's not very good for Kazakhstan. Yes, because after 2014, we talk a lot about the Ukrainian case for Kazakhstan, because I believe now Kazakhstan is like as Ukraine, is like as a Ukraine before 2014, because we have the same problem now. And yes, of course, in my report I talk about the maybe decrease the threat of realize some Ukrainian scenario in Kazakhstan, but in any case we have a lot of problem, a lot of risks, because we have the problem with fifth column in Kazakhstan, not only in society, but in our state structures. Maybe you know last scandals with some of our deputies in our parliament, some deputies in our local representative bodies. Yeah, this is people, officials, people supported Mr. Putin. Yes, I don't know what happened now in our Ministry of Defense. Well, because I believe that a lot of our people receive military education in Russia, because Kazakhstan is a member of organization of collective treaty organization. Yes, and that's why if we talk about the labor migrants, if I return to my previous statements, now we should in Kazakhstan talk about the prospects of Russian labor migrants in Kazakhstan. Yes, because we don't know what will happen in future with these people. Because yes, you know that last year in Kazakhstan appeared about 800,000 people from Russia. A lot of people moved to another countries, Dubai, to, well, different countries. Well, but now, yes, we have 100,000 Russian citizens. Well, and I believe it's very big demand, very big challenge for Kazakhstan, for Kazakh security. Thank you.
Thank you, Dosim. As I said, that would have been my next question. So what do we know about those thousands, tens of thousands, up to 100,000 Russian citizens that came to Central Asia during the partial mobilization, when the partial mobilization was announced? How are they adapting to a new life, or are they moving forward?
Yes, maybe very small remark. Well, some part of these people, yes, of course, I know, because I had some meeting with these people. This is people, very smart people, yes. These people try to work in some startup project in our innovation sphere. Yes, in Astana, in Almaty. Maybe from another hand, it's not very bad for Kazakhstan. We can to attract some human capital. Well, it's especially in innovation sphere. Maybe in some technical sphere, yes, because it's a very big problem for our countries. Well, I mean, the deficits of very good, high skills, very good human capital. Maybe some of these people will work in Kazakhstan and maybe it will be very good for us. Well, but it's very small part of the people, very small part of the people. Because as far as I know, this is very beautiful specialists in IT technology. They think, okay, now maybe I work in Kazakhstan, but my next step, I will go to Europe, I will go to United States. Well, I'm not sure that this is a good specialist. Maybe will stay in Kazakhstan for a long time. I am not sure. Well, because in Kazakhstan maybe will stay another Russian citizens who can not speak English, who hasn't very good education. Well, and maybe these people, they have some великодержавный chauvinism in their head. Well, and I think, yes, we should to divide. This is labor migrants from Russia. Very small part of these people, very useful for Kazakhstan. But maybe the most part of these people, it's like it's a black box for Kazakhstan. We don't know. What is this people? What these people are going to do in Kazakhstan in next 1 year, 2 years, next 5 years? Well, and Kate, Kate mentioned about the relocation of Russian business in Kazakhstan. Yes. Well, I know official statistic. Well, in last year, in 1st September, in Kazakhstan, was opened 50,000 Russia companies. 15,000. It's a lot of. And yes, I believe that these companies will attract Russian people, Russian citizens, to these workplaces in these Russian companies. Well, maybe this is another problem for Kazakhstan, because some part of this business, Russian business in Kazakhstan, maybe will decrease market for Kazakh businessmen, for Kazakh companies. Well, because last year, for example, we have very big scandals when after the war in Ukraine, in Kazakhstan appeared 5,000, I don't know, trackers. This is trackers, грузовики in English. Как будет? Поможете, коллеги?
Trucks.
Trucks, yes. 5,000 trucks from Russia and Belarus received registration in Kazakhstan. Yes, and this is people. It was very big problems for local our business structures who try to have trade with European Union and other countries. Yes. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to comment the issue of Russian relocanti in Central Asia? I think it's hard to say. Yeah, go ahead, Aycan.
It's all right. It's just there is no reliable data at the moment, and that's something that a lot of researchers that I have encountered have mentioned to you. IOM Kyrgyzstan unofficially reported that 730,000 people moved from Russia to Kyrgyzstan, but then 700,000 left. So it's only 30,000 that sort of stayed, and we're not still quite clear what the numbers are like. So in a way, it's very difficult to judge at the moment, but there is definitely a change, like at the lifestyle level. The prices went up. Probably my colleagues can report the same, but Almaty, Bishkek, Tbilisi, Yerevan are all reporting an increase in prices, inflation, because there's a lot of cash coming along with Russian migrants. They do not always take local jobs because they're not always, as Dosim said, they aspire to go somewhere else. But there is some sort of replacement now. Now they qualified, like, I know it's anecdotal evidence, but for example, plastic surgeries in Kyrgyzstan offer a way bigger range of surgeries now because there are doctors coming from Russia and working in local hospitals. Oh, that's quite unusual. But how that would affect us at the bigger scale of things is still quite unclear because it's all in flux. People come and go. Some people stay. The numbers are still not very clear, not verifiable. For some reason, statistics committees of our countries are not particularly keen to report on that as well. And then obviously the Russian state does not issue much reliable information anyway. So it's still quite difficult to judge.
Place to go for work.
So we still see the waves of people coming and going, both Central Asians going to Russia and Russians coming to Central Asia and elsewhere.
Returning to the issue of Central Asians going to Russia, there was a question in the chat about Central Asians actually fighting in Ukraine. Let me see if I can find it. So the question is from Yuan Shal, if I pronounce his name correctly, and it is, have a lot of migrant workers from Central Asia been sent to fight in Ukraine against their will? How is that seen in the Central Asian states? Who would like to answer that?
So let me start with Uzbekistan's case. Like in most of Central Asian countries, I think, like fighting for a foreign state or like serving in a foreign army or is kind of criminally prosecutable act. And especially in the beginning of the war, like labor agencies, etc., or the governments in general tried to convey that message. Say it's kind of criminal activity. So if you kind of engage in that, like you might be facing some kind of arrest upon returning to Uzbekistan. So we haven't heard any stories about that in Uzbekistan, like someone being convicted of fighting in the war, like or being a member of the foreign organization. So, and only case was from Kazakhstan. I think there were like 10 people like who were like, there was some reports about Kazakhstan like initiating a kind of criminal case. I don't know if they were fighting for Russia or Ukraine, but as you know, like Russia is trying to seduce like migrants through this kind of easy like way to citizenship, getting citizenship, etc. And there were reports about some kind of people's kind of dead bodies arriving in Tajikistan, like fighting in the war, probably, something like that. So that might be happening. People like gaining Russian citizenship and then like fighting, or like on the process of gaining Russian citizenship and then going to the war. So that might be happening, but we don't have any, like for myself, I don't have any kind of specific information of how many of these people might be in the in this kind of route. But what I know for sure, because I have some people who are like friends, etc., who have already like been to, for example, like occupied territories as doing some kind of labor work in the occupied territories of Ukraine. So and there were reports of many like migrants from Central Asia, like Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, and Tajiks, being recruited to do some work, apparently in a very kind of highly elaborate schematic way. So and brought to occupied territories to do like some kind of reconstruction work, etc. So that and even if probably the governments in Central Asia are aware of this kind of activity, but they have not been kind of vocal about it. Maybe they are doing some kind of diplomatic work, doing or providing their kind of concerns to Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, etc. But they've been, if they have been doing it, they have been doing it quietly. So.
Thank you. Aycan, would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I don't think they are sent to fight in Ukraine against their will, but there was a big recruitment drive by the PMC Wagner last year, and quite a few Central Asians found themselves in prisons for various charges. So some of them have joined the forces, the PMC Wagner forces. There was also a recruitment drive by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and they would target Central Asians as well, but for money, so they would be contractors. They wouldn't be conscripted. There was also a drive to mobilize citizens, and quite a few of Central Asians, especially Kyrgyz citizens, because as far as I know, that's prohibited in Uzbekistan, have dual citizenship. So they would be holding both Kyrgyz and Russian citizenship. And based on that, they would be recruited to the conscription army as part of the mobilization effort in September. Some of them reported they struggled to leave the country, or they would be targeted. So obviously, labor migrants are usually able-bodied men and women between the ages of 18 to 55. That's the target of mobilization pretty much. So they found themselves in a fairly difficult situation. And then you have another group of citizens who would be ethnically Central Asian. So they would be Kyrgyz, Tajik, Uzbek, but they might have even been born in Russia. So that could be first or second generation of Central Asian migrants who acquired Russian citizenship. So they would be Kyrgyz, Tajik, Uzbek, but Russian citizens. So they would be recruited as well and participate in the war. Now there are also some of volunteers who joined Ukrainian side. As you might have heard, there is a Turan battalion or Turan division in voluntary forces of Ukraine, and that's headed by a Kyrgyz citizen. And there is a report, or he reported that there was a criminal case opened against him in Kyrgyzstan because he declared that he joined the forces as a volunteer, and that's a criminal offense in Kyrgyzstan. The same could be said with regard to Central Asians joining the Russian side, but there are no reports of criminal cases opened against those. So that's a bit of a tricky situation. Like, who do you persecute? People who join Ukrainian forces or people who join Russian forces? So that's all I have to say about this.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. And actually, the question of labor migration leads me to pose you a more sort of broader question. And I know Kate has to leave soon, so I thought maybe she also has something to say about this, which is what is really the future of the Russia-led organizations in Central Asia? I mostly have in mind the Collective Security Treaty Organization, but also the Eurasian Economic Union, which, as we know, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan are members of. What do you think?
I mean, it's a huge question and it's on everyone's minds. I think for the moment, as much as some governments would like to leave the Eurasian Economic Union, that's just simply not possible. I think some other governments are very happy that they never joined. So, I mean, I just, again, it's security where the regional governments are feeling quite vulnerable. But, the CSTO has very much been, called into doubt, and other countries are looking elsewhere for additional supplementary sort of security assistance. I'm sure Dosim's got something to add.
Well, I believe that Eurasia Economic Union, it's a very big problem for Kazakhstan now. Well, now I can see very interesting situation. When 2014, this organization was established, and Mr. Nazarbayev, he talked a lot of, well, it's very good idea. Well, Kazakhstan will receive very great access to the Russia market. Well, 2014, we talk about the very big threats because Eurasia Economic Union, it's a geopolitical instrument of Russia. Well, in post-Soviet era, I didn't see any economical profits for Kazakhstan, 2014. And now, after the war in Ukraine, we can see that Russia tried to use Eurasia Economic Union as a very important instrument in the framework of gray import. Well, parallel import, yes, and because Russia company tried to import a lot of sanctioned products from Kazakhstan, from China through the Kazakhstan in the framework of Eurasia Economic Union, because in the framework of this organization we haven't border. Yes, we have free movement of capital, finance, and different goods without any problems. Yes, of course. In 1st April, Kazakh government decided to increase control in the border. Electronic control. But, well, we have one of the biggest border between Kazakhstan and Russia in the world. One of the very long border, yes. And 1 week ago, I received very interesting information. Only 16% of this border in this has some technical instrument of control. Only 16% of this border. We can to control it using different technical equipment. Another part of this border without any control. Well, it means that Eurasia Economic Union is like I say a very well in Kazakhstan, for example, last time we can see a lot of statements that we should to stop activity in Eurasia Economic Union. Yes, we can to take, okay, Mr. Putin, you started war in Ukraine, and now we have a lot of problems. It's force majeure situation. That's why we can to stop our activity in Eurasia Economic Union. Maybe in future we'll start again. This is Eastern this is some kind of Восточная дипломатия, Eastern diplomacy, yes? Well, we'll be very soft, okay. But unfortunately, Mr. Tokayev, no, he's afraid of to make some such kind of statements. Yes, you mentioned, for example, Kate mentioned about the January events last year when Mr. Putin supported Mr. Tokayev in inter-elite conflict. Yes, if you talk about the collective security treaty organization, well, now we can see a very interesting situation. Inside of this organization, the most part of members in conflict with somebody. Russia against of Ukraine, Belarus supported Russia, Armenia against of Azerbaijan, Tajikistan between Kyrgyzstan have some problems. Only Kazakhstan, very peaceful. Well, it means that this organization is not very effectiveness instrument if you talk about the security. And I'd like to say about another very interesting topic. For a long time, Russia tried to talk. Russia tried to save some position in our region in the framework of this organization, because Moscow a lot of talk about the threats from Afghanistan. But now we can see that the most part of Central Asia countries try to negotiate with movement of Taliban. Well, Uzbekistan, for example, Kazakhstan and other countries try to increase economical activity with Taliban. It means that our countries maybe try to realize own foreign policy towards to Afghanistan without assistance from Russia, without military support of Russia. Yes, and I believe it's very good that now we can see that our countries increase cooperation if we talk about the Afghan policy. And I believe maybe a very important task for our countries to increase military cooperation in our region. I believe Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, first of all, in the framework of organization Turkey state. Yes, well, together with Turkey, for example. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Should I
Yeah,
also-
go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
okay.
ahead.
But
Oh, and Aycan, you also have your hand up, so
yeah,
you're next.
So in terms of economic kind of cooperation or institutional kind of cooperation in economy, like with Russia, like you probably are well aware of, Uzbekistan has been kind of how to say, was very well pressured by Russia to enter, and like they have managed to kind of get this kind of observer status rather than like, and the official line was that like in a way we would join it like after we joined WTO or something like that, or like in tandem. So they were like linking these together. So and given this war situation, it seems that like all of these kind of initiatives are on hold from Uzbek side. But at the same time, what I can say is Central Asia has kind of benefited from the war in terms of easing of Russian pressure, or they have, or this Russian aggression or the war in Ukraine has given much more kind of playing cards vis-a-vis Russia for Central Asian governments. Or at least this is what I have been hearing from some Kyrgyz friends and some Uzbek friends, etc. For example, they were talking about this kind of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway line, which was on the table for a long time, but still never kind of went through this kind of like it didn't succeed, but somehow like things seem to be kind of like now kind of in progress. And there are many other aspects of or this gas union actually. For example, probably it would be quite unthinkable, like if the war didn't start. Like now Russia has lots of gas that it has to sell to someone, and it also gives Central Asians like quite a how to say an instrument, like in a way they can reduce the price, or they can put their own conditions for that, like because it's the initiative is coming from Russia, and then they can like so and probably they are aware of the kind of different risks that comes with it, but still kind of it gives it much more kind of negotiating power, this kind of situation to Central Asian countries. So, and in terms of military cooperation, probably, yeah, the war has been the, how to say, the most effective anti kind of Russia advertisement in a sense for Central Asian countries, because like as it has been many times repeated, it showed that the ineffectiveness of Russian army, which was very like badly feared in Central Asia. So now, like military cooperation is ongoing, but still, I think that there is a big kind of change in thinking about the Russian tactics, Russian military, etc. Because most of the like Central Asian governments, militaries were kind of looking up to Russia for like military skills, etc., or weapons, etc. Now, like probably they are reconsidering it a lot.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought, whether in a way, you know, some experts would have argued that with the war, Russia can no longer, doesn't have the capacity to act as the guarantor for security in Central Asia, and how the hell will break loose and there will be conflicts everywhere. But perhaps then the sort of brighter alternative is actually what Dasim was suggesting, that there is increased intra-regional cooperation and perhaps, but then again, that doesn't really look well with when we look at the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, right? Ayjan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just briefly to comment on this, I think all the regional international organizations with the participation of Russia, they probably need some substantial reform, partly because they're still legacy of the immediate post-Soviet period. Lots of them were designed for that notorious civilized divorce, and we're beyond that. So I think a lot of them need to be reconsidered, restructured, communications reconsidered as well. Any collective security or economic union with Russia needs to be on equal parts, because obviously Russia does what Russia does, but the other partners are never informed in advance about what Russia is planning to do, but they have to bear the consequences, like secondary sanctions or military fallout, or even that very delicate foreign policy situation for every single Central Asian government. I doubt they're grateful for the situation they find themselves in. I would also like to briefly address questions by Violetta, because she posted some time ago. Regarding the first question about the academic cooperation, to be honest, I'm not very well informed about the replacement of Western experts by Central Asian scholars or the other way around. But that is probably because I'm not very much plugged into the higher education system in Central Asia, so I'm not on different boards, so I cannot comment on that. About the attitudes towards Ukrainian refugees, they're so minor, it's quite difficult to speak attitudes, because Ukrainian refugees mostly go westwards and northwards rather than southwards, eastwards. So we don't see a large communities of Ukrainian refugees. Usually those are not many, and usually they have some sort of connection to the region already. So they might be former Central Asian citizens, or they have family who still live in Central Asia, so they just come back. So in a way, they are more local than Ukrainian refugees. And I think they're quickly sort of absorbed by the local communities without being separated. So yeah, that's the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got just 5 minutes left. The sort of in the end, I thought, seeing that there's not really, there's a question on Northern Kazakhstan and the sort of changing demographic situation there, but I don't know, perhaps Dasim, if you want to address that one, you can. But something I actually wanted to ask you about is more about the big sort of geopolitical question and this, you know, rise of China, right? That's something that I am often asked about, is whether, okay, Russia is sort of out, does that mean China is in? What thoughts do you have about that?
Well, I'd like to say that after the war in Ukraine, and I hope that Ukraine will be winner in this war, Russia, in any case, will be younger brother of China. It will be satellite of China in different sphere. Now we can see that Russia will increase dependence on China. Well, for example, in January of this year, for example, Russia was occupied first place as a gas supply to China market. Second place, Turkmenistan and Qatar. Well, it means that for China, Russia is not equal partner now. Russia only instrument in the hand of Xi Jinping, because Xi Jinping, yes, he tried to be as a global player, and he believes that the main confrontation will be between the China and the United States, not between China and European Union, between China and the United States. Yes, well, that's why for China, Russia only is a younger brother in military sphere, maybe source of raw materials and different. Well, it means that in future, China will increase activity in Central Asia region, not only in economical sphere, in military sphere too. We know that in Tajikistan, for example, it was some information about the very close cooperation between Tajik and China military force as well. And I believe Shanghai Organization of Cooperation in future will be more active in first of all in economical and in military sphere. Well, and this is first. Second, well, I believe that China will try to attract all Central Asia countries in own China will try to attract our region as a part of China point of view about the new world of map in future. Yes, that's why it's very big threat for our region. It's very big threat, because if Russia for China is not equal partner, I mean Central Asia countries, we usually for a long time wasn't equal partner for China. It means that for us very important, I mean Central Asia countries, increase cooperation, maybe to establish some regional, very interesting regional organization in the framework of Central Asia region in different sphere, not only military, transport, logistics sphere. Well, in my report, I talk about the window of opportunities. And one of the windows of opportunities to increase our role in world transport logistic map, to increase our role in different sphere, maybe to attract new human capital, to develop some innovation sphere in our region. Yes, we can. Why not? We should to be more active in economical sphere. We should to decrease corruption. Yes, of course, we should to increase activity of local business in our countries. Well, and yes, I understand that Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, it's authoritarian countries. Yes, of course. And Kyrgyzstan, it's a very more interesting example how to develop during the very often change of power. Well, but I'd like to say, in any case, if we talk about our future, if we talk about our independence, we should to be together. I mean, Central Asia region together. And now we can see very interesting situation, because maybe you remember in 19th, Mr. Brzezinski, he believes that Central Asia region will be like as a new Balkan. Well, as like as Afghanistan. Here will be a lot of civic wars, intra-ethnic conflicts. It will be very big destabilization. Now, Central Asia region, one of the stable region in post-Soviet era. Well, it's very interesting situation. And we should to use this situation for development. And yes, we should to have some cooperation with China, of course, because it's very biggest neighbor. But we should to have some distance towards to China. As like as Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, for example, the head of Singapore. Yes, for example, Lee Kuan Yew sometimes he said, well, yeah, China is very big player. Yes, we should to increase cooperate with China, but we should to be very careful towards to China. Well, and China will be more maybe if we want, if China will be more, сейчас in Russian. If we want to present our Central Asia region as an equal partner for all geopolitical players, first of all, we should to inside of our region and inside of our countries to increase our competitiveness in different sphere, in economical sphere, in military sphere, and in political sphere. Only in this case, Russia, United States, Turkey will be more, maybe in this case, for another geopolitical player, we will be as an equal partner, maybe in this case. But now, unfortunately, if we talk about the world map, our region and our countries, it's maybe some outsider. Well, maybe some people in Western countries I know, they say, well, Kazakhstan, this is part of Russian world. And the same, maybe they talk about the other Central Asia countries. It's not very good for us. We should to present our countries and to present our region as an independent, strong, and very effectiveness states in the world map. Well, thank you.
Thank you. That's a beautiful note to end this roundtable with. I just want to give the floor for Aycan and Mirzo if you have any final short comment you'd like to make before we close.
Thank you very much. I think just to summarize, the war in Ukraine has become a massive moment of rethinking. I think Russia realizes that too. So hopefully Russia will change something in its relations with Central Asia. I think Central Asian countries, governments, publics have gathered some frustration about the way Russia has been treating its partners in the region for a while. That was probably signified by Tajik president's rant in October last year when he kept saying, like, we need your attention, we need to be treated with respect and that sort of stuff. Unheard of before, but I think now Central Asian countries, states have a bit more voice. They're still balancing in terms of foreign policy, and it's quite difficult to figure out, to say like one way or another, whether they support or not support Russia. I think they're just waiting to see how this war ends and then decide whose side they would choose. For academics, it has been an interesting year. Quite a few of us have turned into Russia-Ukraine experts. But I'm happy that quite a few of us also stuck to our guns and developed our expertise on the region, with taking into consideration the new geopolitical realities. Overall, I think it's been a very difficult year for the whole world, and I think it's just, to be fair, quite stressful. Like, given the global pandemic and then the war that started, I mean, it was a really bad year, but really bad few years for the region, for the larger Central Eurasian region. But it also showed resilience of people, resilience of some governments. So I try to be optimistic about how things would be. But the most important thing for us is that Central Asian governments and Central Asian people have prioritized interests. And I think that is quite an important shift as well. So there is loyalty, but the loyalty comes with a price. Thank you.
Yeah, so 2 points. There's a lot at stake in what happens in this war between Ukraine and Russia. So even to the domestic developments in Central Asia. And the second one, I completely agree with Dr. Satpayev. It's a unique window of opportunity for Central Asia to build something on their own. Still, there are lots of, Russia is never out. So we have like geographies, Russia is never out and China is in. But there's a very unique kind of opportunity for Central Asians like to locate themselves as a free, independent, sovereign countries of Central Asia, who are like, who have their own voice. And so hopefully, yeah, they will utilize this.
Well, thank you. I think this is then the moment to stop this conversation. Thank you so much, Dosim, Mirzo, Aycan, and also Kate for joining us and providing your insights. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.